You know, if you grew up in the 1970s, your brain developed during this really unique, kind of rare evolutionary window. It was this amazing mix of total freedom and, believe it or not, genuine responsibility. It's a childhood that just can't be recreated. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly how that experience shaped who you are today.
I mean, this quote just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly captures that feeling. It was a time that was so free, so magical, that even decades later you hear people say, man, we really didn't know how good we had it. And that's not just nostalgia talking. It was a fundamentally different way to grow up.
And that really is the big question, isn't it? What was it about the 70s that made it so special? But more than that, how did it psychologically forge a generation that just thinks and acts differently in the world we live in now? Well, let's dive in and find out.
All right, our first trait. This one was born from a single phrase that I bet every single 70s kid heard from their parents. Go find something to do, or I'll find something for you to do. And you absolutely knew that the second option was way, way worse.
Because if you dared, even for a second, to say, I'm bored, you were suddenly folding laundry or sweeping the garage. So you learned fast, figure it out yourself. You weren't handed a schedule of activities. Your day wasn't planned from dawn to dusk. You literally had to invent your entire day from nothing. And that built a really powerful mental muscle.
And you know what? The science completely backs this up. Studies looking at unstructured childhoods show that kids who had to create their own fun, their own entertainment, developed way stronger executive function and creativity. Your brain learned how to generate purpose out of thin air, a skill that, honestly, a lot of modern childhoods just skip over entirely.
Okay, let's move on to our next trait. This one explains why so many people from this era seem almost supernaturally calm in a crisis. And it all comes down to how you learn to handle risk.
Think about it. You climbed trees that were definitely too high. You rode bikes without a helmet, bombing down hills. Every scraped knee, every minor disaster, every close call, that was your nervous system going to school. You were learning, firsthand, the crucial difference between real, actual danger and a manageable risk. All by just living it.
Right? These things weren't seen as some failure of safety. They were rites of passage. Every scar had a story, and every single story was a lesson in physics, gravity, and consequence. It was basically hands-on learning for your entire nervous system.
And the research shows that kids who got to experience physical risk during play actually developed better threat assessment and, get this, lower baseline anxiety as adults. That's why you can walk into a totally chaotic project at work or a family emergency and just start solving the problem while everyone else is panicking. Your brain's been there before.
Now let's talk about another piece of this calm in the chaos puzzle. It's something that is almost impossible to explain to younger generations today. And that's the ability to just be alone, without a screen buzzing and demanding your attention every 3 seconds.
This is such a huge, fundamental shift in mindset. You spent hours in your room just listening to music, or lying on the grass staring at the clouds. You explored the neighborhood by yourself, not because you were lonely, but because being alone with your own thoughts was just normal. Boredom wasn't an emergency. It was just the quiet space where creativity could actually happen.
I mean, just think about that for a second. A really startling study published in the journal Science found that people today are so uncomfortable with silence, they would rather get a mild electric shock than sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. Your brain, on the other hand, it never developed that addiction to constant stimulation. You learned that being alone wasn't something to fear, it was just being.
All right, on to our next trait. Psychologists call it analog patience, and it's a skill that shaped you in ways you probably don't even realize. It's something that was trained into you, day in and day out.
This comparison really says it all. Remember waiting a whole week, an entire week, for the next episode of your favorite show? Or taking photos in a roll of film and then waiting days just to see if any of them even turned out? If you wanted to call a friend, you had to memorize their number and then hope they were even home. Your entire childhood was basically one long exercise in delayed gratification.
And you know what? The long-term benefits are massive. We're talking decades of research going all the way back to that famous Stanford marshmallow test, showing that people who can delay gratification have better impulse control, better relationships, and more success in their careers. Your 70s childhood was basically long-term training for a successful adult life.
And now we come to the trait that really ties everything else together. It's the one that truly defines the era,
and explains that deep-seated competence you see in the 70s generation. I'm talking about unsupervised autonomy.
This was the social contract, right? At 8 years old, you'd leave the house in the morning, and for the rest of the day, no one knew where you were. There were no cell phones, no GPS tracking. That one simple rule represented an incredible amount of trust from your parents. They trusted you to be competent.
And the research on this is clear. Kids who had this kind of freedom developed much stronger internal motivation and advanced decision-making skills. You had to assess situations, make your own judgment calls, and deal with the consequences, all by yourself. That's the reason you can take initiative at work without needing constant hand-holding. So every time you look at the world today, and maybe feel a little out of place, I want you to remember this. You survived a childhood that would probably get parents arrested today, and it didn't damage you. It built you.
Let's just reframe this for a second. You're not outdated, you're actually carrying forward capabilities that are becoming incredibly rare. That independence that might look like neglect to some people today, that's competence. That comfort with silence that seems antisocial, that's depth. And that ability to wait that some might see as slow, no, that is discipline.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty important question. For this brief moment in history, childhood was both completely free and genuinely formative. You got to experience something that just doesn't really exist anymore. So, as we move forward, you have to wonder, are these essential human capabilities, the ones forged in freedom, are they slowly going extinct?